I record this podcast on Gadigal country. I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional custodians.
And I'm recording on Wurundjeri country, part of the Cuylenburg Nation. Let's go.
I know you're gonna dig this.
It's like I've been given like an extra sprinkle of something.
You got layers.
Yeah, I got layers.
I was just thinking, I'm like, we're just such beautiful storytellers.
You're making a lot of sense today, girl. No, I'm done.
Let's jump into it, honest to God. Today, Maddie and I have the pleasure of inviting the Imperfects onto our podcast. The trio are usually the interviewers, but today we're going to be interviewing you. I honestly, the first 5 minutes of us being in the room together, I like opened up already. So I can tell that this podcast is just going to be... No, we're going to actually even it out, balance
I think
it
that's
out.
because we came in just probing your dating life and you're just an honest person.
Exactly.
It's also the
we love
relationship
it.
that we have, whereas because when you came on our podcast, you were very open and vulnerable. So maybe that you're just used to it when you see us.
Maybe.
Your episode on our podcast comes up a lot. We get asked a lot of the time, what are the memorable interviews? Your interview is one that will stay with us forever. We do a lot of like events where people say, what's the interview? And your name comes up every single time. And we still get feedback on it. We still get people messaging us about it. And yeah, it was unbelievable.
Oh,
Wow.
That was going to be a question for later on, but I feel like we jumped it on. Like jumped it.
Like how good was
jumped
my...
it. Yeah, no.
How good was my
episode? No, it
But
was
I
going to
think
be like...
You've actually had that impact because you see people come up to you on the street and say, you know, they recognise that you're on their podcast and talk to you about that conversation. So obviously that was a powerful moment, and that connection between you and the Imperfects must have touched a lot of people. What was it about that conversation that allowed you, Brooke, to get so like deep with these fellas?
One, I think it's a general vibe and energy that you guys give off. But the impact that episode had on me, honestly, it was a really tough time in my life, actually. And during that time, I was going through some turbulent times. But I think it felt like as soon as I walked into the room and saw and met each of you, I felt safe. And safe is not a big word. We talk about this a lot, don't we, Maddie, about cultural safety and how important that is to feel safe, to then feel honest and transparent. And I'm a pretty honest person, but I wouldn't say walking into a room full of like three... Like, and there's no offense to you guys, but straight white males I would immediately feel that, like, you know.
Nor should you.
But yeah, and I think it's
That's
a credit.
what it feels like for an audition in this industry. Just three white men sitting there.
It really be like that, yes. Yeah.
How were you after that record? 'Cause it was such a really deep and heavy at times chat that was like, it was like 90 minutes, I think we chatted for in the end. Like, how were you afterwards?
I
the
actually
few
had
days
the
afterwards?
opportunity to relax, I think, after that episode, which was really nice. And I think that's been the most vulnerable I've been other than writing my book.
Wow.
I talked a lot about my childhood, but I hadn't really vocalized it on an episode, and then maybe a few times maybe on the podcast of our own. But it was, I wouldn't say liberating because it's very like heavy, but it was nice that it felt like it didn't define me or own me anymore, and I was happy to voice it, and I was okay with voicing it. And Maddie and I talk about how important it is to own your story and to redefine and not feel like you're defined by, you know, these things that happen that are traumatic. But we love actually like having authentic conversations, and you guys are just, we like learn so much from you, I think. And we're just so curious to like how you guys made this happen. Like, how did you all get together? You know, because you guys are family.
Yes.
And then Ryan, this is probably familiar ground in a way because you've worked for Nova once before as well.
Yeah.
So how did this relationship happen?
Initially, it wasn't three. Initially, it was just going to be Hugh and I and Josh. Well, to go back a step, Hugh and I met randomly at a cafe in Melbourne.
I was walking past the cafe and I saw Ryan Shelton sitting in there, and I got very nervous. And such a huge fan. I was like, I have to, because I'd see him a lot because we lived in the same suburb, and I just thought, today is the day. I'm going to go and tell him effectively that I love him, and I'm a huge fan.
I love that.
Yeah, the proposal was a little much, but but yeah, it was very nice compliment. So he came in and he sat next to me and he said, yeah, he liked the work that I'd done. But what was actually so lovely, Hugh said, he explained what he did. He started the Resilience Project and he did these talks at schools and sporting clubs and all this sort of stuff. And I was like so impressed. I was like, oh my God, this guy, I thought I had an important job. This guy has an actually important job. And so I was so interested. And then he said, well, I do these talks every day. And to do these talks, I have to be really up. I have to be in a good mood, or I have to have high energy. And I don't always feel like that. Like some days I feel a bit down, or I feel rocked by something and I don't feel like doing a talk. And so before I go on stage, I will watch your videos, and that makes me happy, so I can then go and do the
So you're like his
talk.
pump up, like you're your motivation.
It was really, really nice. And so anyway, then like a couple of years later, I had a midlife crisis and called Hugh.
We hadn't spoken. We didn't speak after that for it was like 3 years. We didn't.
Wow.
We just I think I asked Ryan for a photo, and then posted on Instagram. So that night,
without my consent, that's cool.
Yeah, and. You couldn't collab back then. I would have asked for a collab.
Deny.
And because he's a very nice person, he just liked the photo, and so we knew who each other were. And then 3 years later, he reached out over Instagram and said, "Could we catch up?" I still remember I was in my now wife's parents' house, just like I've never been so excited. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was sad that something had gone wrong and he'd catch up, but I was very excited to hang out. And I remember coming home that night and saying to Penny, my wife, then girlfriend, I think I am so confident we're going to be friends. I am so confident we'll be friends.
Yeah.
I was very excited.
And that never happened, but we did work together.
Still working on the friendship. No, that's probably one thing that I love about when I came on was the follow-up from each of you. Like, the messages and the check-in to see if I was okay and everything. And I feel like that's probably what I've taken from you guys is like when we have guests on is just saying like thank you so much, because gratitude is one of your values, I'm assuming. And I feel like I'm always like really grateful for people just like opening up, and then I always love to thank them and make sure that they are that they know that it was appreciated. I think that's you guys lead an example of that
with Josh joining. So
yes, Josh.
We kind of realised after Ryan.
Who are you? I'm joking.
I'm Josh, huge brother.
You guys are family.
So about 3 years after we first met, then we became friends and then decided to do podcast, and then we realised we had no technical, like, I don't know. I was like, don't we just record it and then just send it somewhere, and it's a podcast? And then we decided we needed someone to help with the technical side of things, and Josh is great with that kind of stuff, and so we asked him and he started doing it. And then whenever we did an interview, Josh would always have a question for the guest. It was off mic, and his questions are always so much better than ours. And so they would just bring out a different side of the guest. It would often change that. And then this is getting ridiculous. Josh's questions are the best. We need to give him a microphone. So it became in the background with a microphone, or questions afterwards if you could think of any. And then in the end, it just became, well, this is so silly not to have this in the interview, and that sort of. So it's very organic. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was at a point in my life where I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing for work outside of that, and so I was really excited to have this to work on, and it was so enriching and fulfilling and sort of inspiring to work with these two guys. And then I just was so drawn into the incredible people that we were talking to. It was hard not to be curious and want to ask questions of people. When something is started and there's only two people doing it on the mic, I think it requires incredible generosity of spirit to say, you should be on the mic talking as well, which I don't think I've acknowledged with you guys enough how grateful I am for that and what a big thing that is. It felt natural, but I think in a lot of cases people could be quite protective of that space that they've created and not want to change it because it was working so well. So thank you. Yeah.
Aww,
pleasure.
I love that.
I want to ask a question around the dynamic. When it comes to putting this podcast together, what is it like behind the scenes? Like, are these conversations organically, created in the moment, or do you guys work on certain themes and topics that you really want to touch on with each guest? What is it like behind the scenes for you guys?
Well, I think that it would be remiss of us not to mention the people who really do bring it together. Bridget Northeast, who's the producer and sort of, I don't know, how would you describe Bridge?
Our mum, who's younger than us.
Yeah, more impressive than anyone ever. And there's Bella, who's our researcher and assistant producer, and then George, who edits, who are there full time, and there's other people like Jam, and there's lots of other people that work on the show. So at the start, it was just the three of us talking about what we might want to talk about with a guest.
To be honest, it was just, who do you know that might go on the podcast?
Yeah, it was pretty much that. Yeah.
That was a little bit like us as well. We're just kind of fluking in a sense.
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty of, and maybe podcasting's changed a bit now, but I mean, no, this still exists, but there's now sort of, I guess, what you'd call like a professional level of podcasting. Whereas when we started, it was, in Australia at least, it was still pretty like, not slapdash, but it was pretty kind of cowboyish, I guess, in how people would pull a podcast together. So I think the stakes felt pretty low at the start. And when that first year, we did, I think, 6 episodes spaced out across the whole year. There was no like regularity to it or plan or schedule or anything. It was just like, once Josh had had enough time to finish editing the podcast around his other actual job, then we release one, then we do another one. So, and then we did that for sort of 2 years. And then iHeart jumped on board to sell the ads. And then they made the very smart suggestion of going like, hey, maybe you guys should think about doing like regular episodes. It might make it a bit easier for us to sell ads. Because we wanted to get a producer on to help us with more episodes, and that's why we needed some ads. And anyway, and so then it became more of a kind of like traditional show, whereas before that it was just experimenting, really.
Yeah.
And now it's like the credit really to how brilliant the people are that we get to work with, of how amazing they are that they do this. But I think it's really important as far as how do you create the space for these vulnerable conversations, which I think was sort of implied in the question, in that it's to me, it's one of my favourite things that's happened this year is that when Bridget will always do a pre-interview with the guests beforehand, have a chat to them, find out their story. And she spoke to someone who was brilliant, a wonderful person, but after the conversation she just said, I don't think they're ready to talk about this in a public space. It'll be too damaging for them to do it. They wanted to tell their story, and she said, I think it would be unsafe for them to do it, and it would be bad for them and their mental health. And it was a no-brainer to say, I'm really sorry, but we don't think you're ready yet and we won't have this conversation. But the fact that we genuinely do put the care and safety of the guest as the number one priority, I think guests feel that. I hope you felt that when you came on. And I think it leads to real conversations that aren't just trying to get a salacious, vulnerable story because that will sell. It's because there's value in telling that story and telling it properly.
Yeah. And that comes with the space. Yeah.
And that space is created months before you come into the show. Yeah.
Credit to your team, because I feel like Maddie and I really value our team equally as well. Like when I feel I have opened up, or I feel like, oh, okay, that's something I probably should have workshopped. You know, when we finish the episode, Rachel's there to hold space for me. So like I credit Rachel so much because she's created that space like for us to speak vulnerably about whatever it is, even if we haven't workshopped it ourselves. And I'm like, can we cut that out?
But that trust is so important.
Yeah. I mean,
and care.
Yeah, that's oh my God, I've just honestly, we're up to you guys because I feel like that episode was just so special to me, especially my journey, because I feel like from then I've felt really good about, even if I've had the conversation just with a random stranger, you know what I mean, about what I've learned about myself. It's like this. It's taken a little bit of a bit of a weight off my shoulders. Wow. In a sense, because I wasn't defined by any of those experiences, I feel like, but the episode itself was really quite heavy. But I didn't feel that afterwards, so that's always great.
Oh, good.
I have learned from you guys that men should be vulnerable, and it's actually a powerful thing. Especially, it's funny when you hear someone else be vulnerable, or you hear, you blokes talking to another guy about some sort of deep emotion or an experience that they've gone through, and you unpack it in such a gentle and beautiful way. I think that is almost like the opposite of what we've been taught, and the opposite of what is ingrained in how we should be as men, and that's even me as a gay man. So I just want to say, like, I see that and I appreciate that about you fellas. I want to ask though, like, what did it take for you and your experiences, and maybe it was something that you had growth together around, but what did it take to get to that level where you are able to be open, vulnerable, and not shy away from letting people see that emotional side?
Well, I mean, for me, I think I've never been a traditionally like in the way you're talking about, Maddie, like I've never been traditionally like vulnerable person, really. Like, it's not really something that was big in like my house growing up. Like it wasn't, we didn't talk about big emotions or anything like that. It was very much surface level and making sure everyone felt safe and, good, consistent. There was lots of love, but not necessarily emotional conversations. And so for me, like, kind of ironically, the thing that got me to be vulnerable was, well, actually, I was able to be vulnerable with Hugh. I mean, that's the before we even decided to do the podcast, like we talked about before, when I first messaged Hugh out of the blue on Instagram and said, can we catch up for a coffee? I'd had this sort of epiphany in my life, and it was kind of like a pre-midlife crisis. Like, I could see the midlife crisis coming, but I wasn't in it yet. But it was like, oh shit, that's going to come my way if I don't do something. And so I had all these thoughts and this kind of like, and I didn't really know who to talk about it. I mean, I have lots of people I could talk about it, but for whatever reason, Hugh jumped into my head. I literally hadn't seen him in 2 years. Like, met him once. Yeah. And I was like, that guy has the Resilience Project. He'll know what to say. Like, for some reason, I trusted that he would know, and he would like treat it carefully and, be sensitive to it. And so when I met up with Hugh, I just kind of like said everything, didn't I? Everything. I was like,
it was amazing.
Just vomited vulnerability in his face. And the great thing is that he didn't give me any advice or didn't even really say that much. He just sort of listened. And just, I don't know, like, put me in touch with a few different people, but that sort of kicked off. It probably like speed ramped our relationship, in a way that if we had have like just bloody met at the footy ground, or usually how I meet blokes, just in the nets, hitting sixes in the nets, or spinning flippers. If I had have met him that way, then maybe the relationship might have taken longer to get to that point. But because it was like bull out of the gate, like straight into the vulnerable stuff, we were having deep conversations like every week, and that's how the podcast came about. So my vulnerability only was able to happen because I felt safe in talking to Hugh about it.
There's also, I've never asked you this, but would it have been hard for you to be that open with your mates that you'd known for like 15 years?
Yeah. Well, I could have spoken to them about it, but it would have... and this is nothing against them, but I think Hugh was just naturally so in tune with everything I was talking about in terms of like the work that he was doing. And I think at that point you were studying to be a counsellor, like you were literally doing a counselling course. Yeah. And I don't know, I think a lot of, and me included, if someone came to me with that, my natural instinct is to try and solve their problem. And from what I've learnt since doing this show, it's like that doesn't actually, it's actually not the right thing to do to try and solve the problem. It's just to listen and, but yeah, so that really helped the fact that I think I knew Hugh would be the right person to talk to, and he was. But if I had have spoken to a friend of mine, maybe that would have been fine too. Maybe it would have been just as good. Maybe I'd be doing a podcast with a different person. But the way it worked out was incredible, perfect. Yeah.
I just think it can be quite hard to switch, like quick switch modes, like with someone that you've been friends with for a long time, and you've only got like one style of communicating. Someone I've never been vulnerable with, and there's this kind of built friendship of 15 years, and going, Like, I think about some of my mates and some of the conversations I've had with people on the podcast I've never met before in a really safe space, or with you guys. But then I find myself, because of the podcast, a few of my mates, I think, have felt like they can sort of talk to me a bit the way you felt like that with Hugh. And I find this, and it's like a really nervous energy of like, oh shit, oh sorry, can I?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh, poop.
Like,
I think poop's worse.
I was going to say, I can't remember the last time I've heard poop.
Poop's disgusting, actually. What a
Wash your
horrible
mouth
word. Sorry, Josh.
That's the title of this episode, just a load of poop. Kidding.
I feel there's this nervousness of like, shit, we're going here, and we've never done this before. We've known each other for like, I'm thinking of one friend in particular I've known for 22 years, and we'd never talked vulnerably before. And there's this real nervousness and scariness of like, are we going to be able to negotiate this and handle it? And it was an amazing conversation and beautiful. And I'm so glad we've done it. But it felt a lot harder with someone that I've known for 20 years than it is, because there's so much baggage and so much life experience between us. Yeah.
I also think the other thing to acknowledge probably for you, Maddie, is like, I think you can only be vulnerable when you feel like completely safe. And I'm probably assuming here, but like, as a gay man, maybe you don't feel as safe emotionally as much. Maybe I don't know. Obviously, it's like I'm making big assumptions here, but it might be harder to jump in and go, I'll be vulnerable. I trust everyone around here. I trust everyone's got my interests at heart, and everyone is going to be supportive and loving of me. I don't know if that sort of resonates with you at all.
Yeah, I think it does. I also think that intersection of being a First Nations person as well, you know, the whole resilience cap we have to wear, and sometimes I don't feel that way, but I pretend, you know. So it's like I'll feel strong or feel like you have to sort of have everything together. But I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I think there's probably layers of everything, including that, as to why. But I do think that safe spaces I don't think they're created as like I don't come up against them as easily as I think I would like to. You know,
yeah, of course. Yeah, so it makes sense. I think it makes sense totally that you find vulnerability can be a bit harder, because I think you need to trust as well. There's to be a huge element of trust, and I completely get if you don't feel that all the time from people. It makes sense, especially the way society is at the moment. So yeah, I totally understand that.
I worry about our next generation about vulnerability and sharing emotions, but I also seeing an increase in platforms like TikTok where they're expressing a lot of their stuff, but complete strangers, and feeling comfortable doing that. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about this. Yeah. Do you what's your perspective, I guess, on that with having your own children?
Well, I guess there are two parts of it. I think it's really important to be like I think we jokingly have on our, well, not jokingly, it's kind of serious, on our like T card things that we say always vulnerable responsibly, because I think it's really important to do it in a way that you feel safe to people. That it's a really like, I've always probably been leaning into vulnerability more, and probably in times and moments when I shouldn't have in the past, and I've sort of been burnt a few times in my life by probably giving a bit too much of myself to people that weren't capable of handling that, and it's hurt, and only ended up hurting me more. And so I think it's incumbent to emphasize that it's really important to only do it with people that you trust and who have got your interests at heart when you're doing it, and nothing else. That's why I worry about being really vulnerable just out into a platform like TikTok, and just because it's the Wild West out there.
Yeah.
And like it's and I don't think everyone who watches your video has your best interests at heart. So that is worrying. I think as a parent, it's, I guess, just emotions and vulnerability of your kids is something you negotiate every 20 minutes. I think you've got a new challenge ahead of you, and it's difficult. But I see like, certainly I can only really speak for me and the friends and my friends, but I see a lot of fathers leaning into vulnerability with their kids a lot more than I think they were, in general, the generation before they were shown, I think. Yeah. I'm sure it's not everywhere, but I feel lucky that that's certainly, I would say, more of the norm in my friendship group.
Yeah.
We should probably say that Josh and I really feel as though we hit the jackpot with our parents, as far as they were always like wanting to know what was going on, how we were actually feeling. Mum would always ask us the emotion we were feeling, always. And would always unpack it for ages with us. So it's always felt very...
And there was never any judgment from Dad about any emotion?
No, not at all.
So we're incredibly lucky.
And I think we kind of hopefully then, having had that modelled to us, we'll do the same with our kids.
I think it's good to acknowledge, though, that when you hit the jackpot like we did with our parents, it makes it like it's easy to see. It's easy to do what you've seen and what you've experienced, and we saw it and lived it firsthand. So just being, I don't know, just acknowledging that I know it's a lot harder for other people to lean into this kind of thing, because I think we were luckily shown it from a really early age. So it feels, something about it feels natural and right, as opposed to feeling really scary.
Yeah. And everyone, if there's one thing I think all three of us have, even if we knew it, that we've learnt properly since doing the podcast, is that everyone is going through something, and it's not a competition. Some people are going through everyone's going through some level of pain, or at different points, and even if they're not, it's just sort of best to assume that they are, because we just don't know. And so I think the listening without judgment is sort of like becomes obvious when you kind of just, if you assume everyone you talk to, even if they come across like they've got nothing wrong in their life and they're doing great and they got an awesome job and super sweet Mazda MX-5, and they just seem like they're kicking goals. It's like, if you just assume that they're struggling with something in their life, then it's going to make the conversation a lot different, I think.
I think that happens a lot in our industry as well. Like, you will see somebody who might be perceived as like their best moment of their career, or they're having like such a highlight in their life on social media, but behind the scenes it seems to always be at the same time that they're maybe going through the roughest patch personally. It's some weird sort of moment, that happens, that often people tell me about.
I mean, literally our very first episode was with Missy Higgins, and that is exactly her story. When she was special toing the hell out of it around Australia, and at her absolute peak, she was at her lowest mentally, and that really set the tone for like, this is people, we just don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah. Maddie, you have like a really nice like analogy that you use a lot.
Do I?
On the hill.
I have an idea for a kids program in a school, but it more speaks to privilege, and it more speaks to the idea that we all start on somewhere on a hill. It's a visual way of learning and teaching kids that in life there are people who may start more towards the top of this hill, and their goals may be closer to them, and their terrain and the path that they choose to walk in life or get to choose by their privilege is much easier than yours, but it doesn't mean you can't make it to the top. So I have this idea of really wanting to go into schools one day and teach kids about the journey of trying to achieve what we want in life and finding our passion and inner joy. Because I think one thing that I've realized is I've been able to create this path on this hill that really works for me and provides me a lot of joy, and that's being able to have this this life that I always wanted and be in the career that I love, because it's what I'm meant to be doing. It's my inner joy, and I just think there's so many people that don't get that opportunity in life, that don't get to do what their purpose is. But that's definitely down the track. It's an idea that I shared with Brooke only on the weekend, actually. So
sorry.
It's very new.
Valuable.
It's very new. So it's not
fitting.
a fully
it's exciting though.
It's I just also know how much sacrifice it takes to do what you love as well. It's not like you can have everyone holding on to you while you try and make it to the top, but once you get to the top you can show them the way, so it's like there's just a lot of visual aspects to this analogy that I think is really easy for young people to understand and be able to use as a bit of inspiration in their life. But it also correlates with a podcast where they're able to talk about their dreams, goals, and what that journey may look like for them. So yeah, it's a down the track thing.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
What is something that each of you have learnt on this journey about yourselves that maybe you didn't know beforehand? Like, you get to do something that is quite profound, and that is, share people's stories, elevate people's voices, but also in a weird way, you're like 3 therapists,
Definitely not.
What?
Let's hope not.
Well, it sounds like that in my ears, and that's a compliment, by the way.
3 perspectives, I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I think, what is it that you've learnt about yourself that you can share with us on this journey?
There's so much. I feel like every episode we have, there's a moment where Brooke's episode, for example, it really reiterated to me how important it is to think about the journey of First Nations people and remind ourselves of what they went through, what they still go through, and it was very powerful for me in that regard. Like, it's always sort of, you do think about a lot, but I think it needs to be more front of mind for everyone, and that's sort of what happened there. For me, very specifically, we did an episode on ADHD with a psychologist who's an expert on ADHD end of last year, and then I realised that was me. I was just talking about me. It took a while to get there, but yeah. So I literally discovered I was ADHD through our own podcast, which was funnily enough, I didn't think about it at all when we were doing I was thinking about all my friends who might be ADHD, and then I mentioned it to my wife, and then we sort of went on a bit of a journey with it, and then I listened to the episode again, and I went, "Oh, it's definitely me." So I listened to our podcast to work out that I was ADHD, which has been very life changing. So that was a big one for me.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's constant. I wish I could think of like a really, really big one, but it's often like little things that can maybe have big impact or make big change potentially. Like, even just today, we spoke to this a psychologist, and it was all about sleep, and she was talking about the importance of sleep and the impact on our brains and our life, and how. And of course I knew just anecdotally that sleep's important, and I've heard people, I've read about it, but the way she put it today, I was like, oh, okay. No, I know I need to get 8 hours sleep, but I really need to get 8 hours sleep. And I need to prioritize it more than I do currently. So even that, if I actually go on and put that into practice, then it could potentially have a huge impact on me. Yeah. Yeah. So it's lots of things that, some things I hear and I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible. And then I'll forget about it. And then I'll hear it again later on, if we put it into a clip, and I'm like, oh, that's right. That was a cool bit from the podcast. Yeah.
Some hit, some don't.
Yeah. Some stick, some don't. Yeah.
I'm the type that would use that sleep, that learning from that sleep psychologist probably as an excuse to have naps in the day.
Naps are good.
Naps are good.
You know what?
Naps
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
20 minutes.
20 minutes. No longer though. 20 minutes is the max.
So you time it.
Yeah. But very good. For me, I don't know why this feels really vulnerable to say, but for me, it's just that I feel like I am enough as I am. I didn't really feel that for most of my life, and this podcast has changed that for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I don't know if I had kids at the same time as this podcast started, so I don't know if it's definitely them as well. I can't sort of separate the two because they're almost like a months within each other. But I'm okay, because I certainly didn't feel like that for most of my life before that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
It's so great that I just heard that from you, Josh, because today when I was journaling, I was writing about the feeling of not being enough. And so I really resonate with what you just said, and sometimes you do have to sort of find something that allows you to find that feeling, and you found your podcast. I think I'm on a journey.
Yeah.
It's out there somewhere. But feeling enough, can I ask you what does that feel like for you?
Well, sadly it's not fixed sort of thing. It's not like I feel, it's like, oh yeah, I got there and I feel like enough and now I don't look back. I feel like I fluctuate, and in bad time, it's almost like I feel like I'm enough more than I feel like I'm not enough now.
Great.
but it doesn't mean that I don't still feel the way I used to when, for a variety of reasons, whether it's lack of sleep, or just a bad week where shitty things have happened. But to you know what? It's a strange. We had a revelation on the show once when we were talking. Hugh said something about when he meets someone really good or really funny, he has this feeling, I hope I'm getting this right, of like, oh, I can't wait for us to be friends. Whereas I had never heard it vocalised like that, and I always thought more like they wouldn't want to be friends with me, and even if they do, they'll work it out pretty quick that I'm not someone you want to be friends with. Yeah. And I think that's fading for me, and I feel like, well, why wouldn't they? Like, I'm not that bad. And that's a nice and that's a really nice thing to carry, and to say what it feels like, Maddie, I think it's like I was unaware of the weight that I was carrying before that revelation, and the weight might feel like it's there some days, but other days it's not, and that's a pretty great feeling. And it's great to be a dad and be able to look at your kids with that feeling, because you certainly don't want them to feel that. And so I think you have to be able to say it about yourself first before you can teach them not to believe that. Wow. So that gives me hope. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're
little bit of a golden Josh nugget for you, doesn't it?
Oh, I know. Got me good. I was like, damn.
He'll do that to you.
Save it for our show, Josh. Jesus.
Love you guys. Oh, God. I feel like that plays into, like, comparison culture sometimes. Like, I feel like that's an out for me for 2025 is comparing. Because I always had this mentality like there's more than enough to go around, whether that's like money, love, like kindness, like there's so many things that there's more than enough. Like why do we, and I find myself comparing myself a lot. Like why do we not get like enough downloads, or why do people not come to our things? Like I was really down. We did like a live show, and it immediately jolted me because I thought I had an expectation, I guess, of like who was gonna come, and then it didn't exceed my expectation. But instead of being like, oh, this shit happens, poop happens.
Exactly.
I was like, oh, no one likes me. I'm irrelevant, and I go down this like, and I have the same thing of like not feeling like enough, but also feeling like too much sometimes because I've been told that like, and I have my own battles with that, but like it's nice hearing that these conversations, because like I feel the same way, like I am enough as I am, and the right people will find me, and the right people will appreciate my energy, even if that is too much sometimes. And it doesn't
for me, it doesn't have a realization that it doesn't have to be everyone as well. That's a nice realization to know that if you've got enough people that appreciate you for truly who you are, that it can help to insulate from some of those comparisons, I think, potentially. But they're still there. It's hard to avoid, I think.
Hard to avoid. Yeah. But it's an out. Comparison culture. It's an out for me.
Get it out. That's a good thing to get out. Yeah, absolutely.
What role does social media play in that for you? Because you've got such a big presence on social media, and to do that, I'm guessing you must have to be on social media a lot, and you see what other people are doing and people who are in your industry, what they're achieving, because everyone's putting up their best stuff. Does that kind of highlight to you if you're putting on a show for your live show, and then you'll see another podcast that does similar stuff to you doing a live show, and you're like, why have they got people there? Does social media, what I'm trying to say is, does social media make things harder or easier for you?
Well, there's so many good things about it that I love, and I kind of try to revel in those, or relish in those, but I think it's conversations that are like face to face and of face value, and genuine messages, I think, that really make this whole social media aspect of my life feel valuable in a sense. Other than that, it just feels like I just use it as a tool to advertise what's really important to me, which I think is a good balance.
Really important.
just kind of got sucked into this vortex, I think, over the years. Maddie and I talk about this a lot, but it hasn't been in the last couple of years that I've really come back to myself, and I realized that I was not boring as what people would think or would say about me. I was like, actually, I'm really creative, but I can't share that world because people don't know that world or know that of me. So if I just share it, people are going to be like, okay, she's gone unhinged. Like she's gone off the rails.
Yeah, like you're out of your lane or something.
Yeah, I'm out of my lane. Yeah, and I had to stay in my lane in order to fit this. Yeah, and I think that's something really I battle with sometimes, with what I share and what I don't share. But I feel like when share the moments that I enjoy and I love, like the moments with my dad, everyone loves those moments.
Yeah.
Like they're like, oh, this is so, really wholesome. And I'm like, yeah, that's the things I love. So hopefully you love it. But I was also going to ask the question of you guys, when you're doing the episodes and everything, and it does get to a part, I mean, Josh, you've beautifully opened up, and I'm like always so grateful for that. And I think like but all of you have, but do you pick and choose? Like when do you rein it in, and when do you like choose to share, and when do you say, oh, okay, like I haven't workshopped that, I'm gonna like keep that private? And I mean, we touched on it a little bit. I know you have a team, but like within yourself.
The most helpful analogy, I think, I can't remember who said it, whether it was Bridget or I'm not sure, was it's like it's not healthy to an open wound is not a healthy thing to sort of show, but scars. Like a scar, to talk about a scar, it's a much safer thing to do for yourself and for the listener, but an open wound potentially not, if that kind of makes sense. I think that was the...
It's also kind of, I think when either one of us or a guest talks about a scar, like, so in other words, like something that happened in the past and they've somewhat processed it and thought about it and are able to talk about it in a reflective way, that is... It's almost more, I think, for the purposes of the people listening, it's more helpful, I think, because they've got some perspective on it. Whereas, when it's an open wound, and maybe if they're in the middle of going through something and it's really hard, then it's, I don't know, I feel like it can still be really helpful, but in our experience, it's usually more helpful to the listener, which is always the filter. Like, it's more helpful to the listener if it's a reflection on a wound, on a scar. On a scar.
A scar. Yeah, that's a really great analogy.
I'm not taking credit for it. It definitely wasn't me who thought of it. I think it would have been Bridget. Yeah.
Shout out to Bridget. That's amazing. Yeah, we've been doing this for only 2 years, so not nearly. You guys are in your 7th season.
7th, yeah.
You're doing a long time, and you've had some awesome people on. Like, I've listened and learnt so much from different perspectives and everything. Can I ask you what does 2025 look like for the pod, or in terms of like, will this just continue on for you guys? I know you guys have done like a few live shows in your time. Like, who's your dream guest actually? Like, who would you love to have a conversation with or been sitting at the table with?
I mean, for me, it's probably Jim Carrey.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he's
absolutely.
Like, I think I was probably in year 11 or 12 when like Ace Ventura and The Mask and those films came out. So he's very much, my influence, one of my influences, like being in comedy. And he's gone on his own like complete life change, and the way he's good mates with Eckhart Tolle, and like he's just like, he's got some amazing things to say. So I would love to have him on. Yeah.
Would you have Eckhart on as well?
Nah.
I went and saw him. It was a 2-hour show, and he just spoke about watching birds. Do you remember that?
I can't remember.
There was this part where he was like, just sit and watch the birds, and he imitated a bird, and it was actually really good.
That's a very Eckhart thing to do.
It's very Eckhart. I've read both of his books.
Eckhart, why are you watching birds? YouTube has got heaps more shit on it.
He like suggested going watching birds and just analysing them and being in his thing is Power of Now and like present moment, right? So Jim Carrey for Ryan.
Jim Carrey.
Okay. Yeah. I was a huge Ace Ventura fan.
Yeah.
Who isn't? My dream guest, I'm kind of terrified because I don't think it's like an impossible thing. It might happen. It might happen one day, but I'm kind of scared that it will. Being Nick Cave.
Yeah.
He has experienced a lot in losing 2 sons now. In tragic circumstances. I mean, I can't actually. What circumstance of losing a child isn't tragic? But he is this, for me, absolute model of honest vulnerability. But he is so intellectually brilliant and so incredible that I just feel so inadequate near him. So I think it would be a terrifying interview. So I kind of like dream guest that I kind of hope doesn't actually happen, because it would just be too much. Yeah.
You're like, what do I say?
Yeah, I'd just be too nervous. I'd fluff it. Yeah.
I should probably, you mentioned our live show before I forget, but we're doing, that's probably the most fun I've ever had in my life, but it's right up there. We did a live show last year and toured the country the year before, and we've decided to write a brand new show because we just have so much fun doing it. So this year to answer your first question, we're writing a brand new live show, and we're touring all the major cities around Australia end of the year, so that I cannot wait for that. My dream guest we had Pat Cummins, Australian cricket captain. So very much fell in love with him, and gave him a lift to and from the hotel as well. I haven't done for a guest before.
Only person who's ever done that for. sorry.
Always a first.
But having had him, I'd love to have Billy Connolly, Scottish comedian. I'd love to have Billy on. That'd be that would be pretty cool.
Who's your dream guest, Maddie?
Well, I was the one who said, can we get the Imperfects on? So how about that?
Shit. Thank you, Maddie.
That's
so
lovely.
we ticked that off. No, we love it. But thank you so much for coming on today. It's been such a wonderful chat. I appreciate what you're doing for, I want to say this, I appreciate that you're creating a space for men to listen in and get in touch with their vulnerability. I think it's a super powerful thing, especially in the current political climate where we see a lot of misogyny. And I think that it's definitely the combat to one of the things that can combat the misogynistic ways of men and how they treat women in the world with these sort of conversations. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Brooke.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.